So I think we'll get started. For those who have just joined us, we're going to start in about 1 minute. And while we're waiting, just a couple of housekeeping notes for those who are already on. This is an event that we're managing as a webinar. So tonight you're only going to be able to see the speakers, and unfortunately we're not going to be able to see all of your faces, which is a whole lot more fun. It just turned out to be easier to manage. So everybody except for the speakers will be on mute. If you have questions or thoughts, and we really do encourage you to ask questions or share thoughts, you can go down to the bottom of your Zoom page and click on to chat, and then you'll see something pop up on the right-hand corner, and at the lower right-hand corner, you can submit your questions, and you can either submit them to me, who I will be fielding them. My name's Peggy Duxbury, or you can submit them to everybody. And since we're already 3 minutes underway, I think we'll go ahead and get started. I want to welcome everybody that's joining us tonight for the Minnesota chapter of Clean Energy for Biden. For those of you who don't know who we are, we're an all-volunteer group that is about 200 people now. We formed back in July, and our goal is to make sure that voters in Minnesota who care about climate change turn up in large numbers to ensure an overwhelming Biden victory here in Minnesota this fall. So my name's Peggy Duxbury, and while I live in Seattle right now, I'm from Minnesota. I grew up in Bloomington, graduated from Jefferson High School, and my first job out of college was as a legislative aide to the late Congressman Bill Frenzel, who was a Republican for about 20 years, who represented the suburban Southwest Twin Cities area of Minnesota. So this is our second event. We had a kickoff a couple weeks ago where we heard from 3 mayors who represented a really diverse cross-section of towns and cities in Minnesota. And each one of them recognized the threat of climate change and how serious that threat is. And even more importantly, each one of them are implementing really exciting climate sustainability plans. I think it was a hopeful way to kick off this group, and it was an optimistic story that really focused on climate leadership and climate action. So today we're going to shift that focus from looking at what local action is all about and going to the full planet, what global action is like. And we're going to examine why this election is so important, particularly when it comes down to international leadership and action on climate change. It's important to remember that the Earth really doesn't care if a ton of carbon comes from a small village in Brazil or a mega city like Beijing or my hometown of Bloomington. A ton of carbon is a ton of carbon. This is a global challenge, and it's going to require a global response. A response that hopefully comes from and starts with the President of the United States. And unfortunately, right now we face a really stark choice in terms of what climate action and climate leadership looks like over the next 4 years. On the one hand, if we re-elect Donald Trump, we'll face 4 more years of a climate denier in the White House. He calls climate change a hoax, and he even doubled down on this yesterday in California when he told the world, unbelievably, that he thinks the Earth is about to start cooling down. On the other hand, we know Joe Biden takes climate change seriously. We know he will demonstrate leadership and action by moving swiftly to rebuild the US support for clean energy jobs and technologies, not just here, but around the world. And he will make sure that we rejoin the Paris Climate Agreement. Right now, we're the only country that's not part of this historic action. So while I think I'm preaching to the choir with the group that's here tonight, elections really matter. And for so many reasons, I think the stakes feel much higher this time around than any other past election that I've voted in. So to help motivate and inspire us tonight, we're going to start out with Kate Woolford, who many of you probably know. She's going to set the stage. Until recently, Kate was the president of the McKnight Foundation, which really is a philanthropic hometown treasure for those of us from Minnesota. While at McKnight, Kate and her board launched a major initiative to combat climate change. Their smart investments supported so much amazing work on clean energy and climate, both in Minnesota and across the Midwest. And they were always tying it back to the importance of global action. So I can't think of anybody who could do a better job at connecting these complex dots between the urgency of voting, the urgency of electing Joe Biden, and the urgency of restoring US global leadership and action for our Earth's climate. So with that, Kate, I'd like to turn it over to you.
Great. Thanks, Peggy. And I would like to add my welcome to everybody in the call tonight. Thanks for carving some time out to be with us and talk about these important issues. We don't need a lot of reminders about the urgency, but as we started the call, we talked about among ourselves about how the skies are gray across this entire country because of wildfires raging in Oregon and California, but there are wildfires raging in Russia and Greece and in the Amazon. We know that another hurricane is bearing down on the Gulf Coast with Sandy, yet another one this year, one of many. And in the Midwest, we know that over the past couple of years, we've had way too many floods of the century, flood of a lifetime. These occurrences are happening more and more and with increasing intensity. So we know that climate impacts are not something of the future, they are now. And it's human cost, it's incredibly difficult economic costs, and also the loss of habitat for wildlife and birds. So I don't need to convince you of the urgency. We're starting to feel it in our daily lives more and more. What do we do about that? So I'm going to take you back a couple of years to 2015. I had the opportunity to be in Paris for the Conference of Parties, the UN conference that reached the landmark Paris Agreement. And I was there not just as a grant maker, which McKnight is, but as an institutional investor because of our investments in clean energy and our shareholder action with businesses. So I was there with large pension plans from New York to California. And we were also there with businesses like our homegrown General Mills, Target, Best Buy, who were also there to advocate for urgent climate action. We were joined by indigenous leaders around the world, young people, including many of Minnesota's young people, and mayors and governors. So all of these actors coming together to really push and support national governments to take ambitious action. Being there when the agreement was announced was the proudest moment of my career, and maybe one of the proudest moments of my life. And just as importantly, being there and seeing US leadership from President Barack Obama, from Vice President Joe Biden, from administration leaders coming together, bringing China to the table and other governments to support a truly ambitious plan and commit to action. Fast forward, we know the story. We've had 4 years with the Trump administration that has not only abdicated US leadership in the global arena, it's actively fought any common sense climate action, as well as a lot of other important environmental issues where they have always been on the wrong side. So we knew from the first call of this group when we met with local mayors across the state of Minnesota, local action is really important. We need clean energy in our communities for good jobs and air quality benefits. But local action is not enough. We also need US leadership at the global arena once again. So Joe Biden's coming to town and so is Donald Trump. Both of them are coming on Friday. So friends, this is no longer flyover territory. We are an epicenter. We are a battleground state. And you know that from the money coming in and all the mail and calls that you're getting. It is a battleground state where every vote will matter. Every vote for Biden-Harris will matter. Every vote to keep Senator Tina Smith in her position will matter because that is critical to getting a Democratic Senate as well as continuing a Democratic House and a Democratic president who will all bring climate championship to the table. So I know when I look at my nieces and nephews, when you look at your kids and your grandkids, and they ask, what did you do in 2020 to save the planet? I want to be able to say, not only did I vote for Joe Biden, but I helped get out the vote. I made donations as I could, and I did everything I could to put a climate champion in the White House once again. I hope the conversations that follow will help inspire you to do the same. So with that, I'm happy to turn it back to Peggy for our first panel.
Oh, thank you, Kate. That was fantastic. And you know, the last time I saw Kate, we were in Paris. I was there with a group called the Business Council for Sustainable Energy. I think a grantee of the McKnight Foundation at one point. And you were there, and I think actually Jay was there. And Kate, you and I took a small break when there was a little bit of a respite in what was a very hectic period. And we did a wonderful walking tour of the streets of Paris. So Kate, will always have Paris, and let's hope we have Paris again, right? So just for everybody on the call, the next phase of the call is going to be 2 mini panels. I'm going to moderate one, and then I'm handing it over to Kate Knuth, who's going to moderate the second. This first panel, which I'll go ahead and jump into, are 2 individuals who I'm really excited to hear from, who have had a vast amount of experience on these global climate issues, coming from the same end game, but very different perspectives. The first person that we're going to hear from is Kevin Knobloch. Kevin spent many years as the president of Union of Concerned Scientists, which is probably one of the leading NGOs that focuses on the science of climate change. He left to go join Ernie Moniz to be his chief of staff as a senior Obama appointee in the Obama-Biden administration. And he's going to talk a little bit about, you know, he was in the room where it happened, when many of these decisions like Paris unfolded. What was that like? Why does climate leadership and action from a president matter? And what was some examples of what he saw in those rooms? Then we're going to switch gears and go to Lori Dando. Lori is a Minnesotan. She was born and raised in St. Paul, was a attorney for the Dakota County for many years, and then she did a career shift and became a foreign service officer, and spent the last 25 years traveling all around the world working on representing the United States in the diplomatic world. A lot of that time was spent working on environmental issues. Most recently, she was the head of the US mission for the UN Environmental Program in Nairobi. And so she's going to talk a little bit about her experience as representing the US in a non-political role. So with that, Kevin, if you could shed some light on what it was like during those wonderful days of Obama in Paris.
Well, thank you, Peggy, and what a privilege to be with everybody tonight. I really could not be more pleased to be invited. I want to talk about how leadership matters, and it matters enormously. And we all appreciate the sense of urgency facing us with climate change. That urgency has been with us for well over a decade, probably 2 at least. On my second day on the job, when I joined the Obama administration in June of 2013, it was about a month after the secretary was confirmed. I came in as chief of staff, as Peggy said. On my second day on the job, President Obama announced the Obama-Biden Climate Action Plan. And you'll recall there was a pent-up hope that in the second term that having settled, gotten the economy on its footing and passed comprehensive health care and so on, that we could turn our attention to climate change. And that was so. I'll never forget that day because the president made the announcement at Georgetown University. It was a swelteringly hot day. We all sweated right through, but also because that plan gave every agency, it gave the West Wing, the Executive Office of the Presidency, and every agency marching orders. This is what we need to accomplish over the next 4 years, clear, measurable goals. And I was very proud. Well, first of all, the secretary asked that I take the agency lead at DOE for implementing our pieces for which we were responsible in the President's Climate Action Plan. And I assembled the best team I could, and very proud that we delivered on every one of our pieces, including we strengthened some 50 energy efficiency standards for lighting, heating, cooling, electronics, industrial equipment, appliances of all kinds. And we're going to see the benefits of that, of those strengthened standards coming into the economy in the years ahead. Probably the most consequential action step that the Obama-Biden administration took and the president and vice president took was sitting down with China and negotiating the US-China climate agreement. You will recall that China was sort of stuck in this place of we're a developing country like everybody else, even as their economy grew to the largest in the world, and their carbon emissions grew to the largest in the world. This was some very skillful diplomacy and intensive diplomacy that yielded that agreement. It was announced in November 2014. It was a giant bilateral step that broke the global logjam in the climate diplomacy, and it really then that spurred the negotiations over the next year that yielded the Paris Climate Agreement that Kate was speaking to, that was finally negotiated at the Conference of the Parties in November 2015. And that, just as a quick reminder, that US-China Climate Agreement, it committed the US to an economy-wide target of reducing our emissions by 26 to 28% below 2005 levels by 2025, and to make best efforts to hit that 28% mark. For China's part, they committed to achieve a peaking of their CO2 emissions by around 2030, and to make best efforts to peak early and reduce the percentage of their fossil fuels dramatically. That led to the Paris Climate Agreement, which was very exciting. Kate, I was there as well with the secretary, and it was really something, because it was the first time that virtually every nation in the world agreed to have as national policy a sharp bending down of their carbon curve. And you will recall that every country agreed to a nationally determined contribution. Paris Agreement entered into force in November 2016, and today 189 of the 197 parties have entered into the convention and have this policy. Well, I think we'll circle back a little bit later to talk about what President Trump has done on that. And just to finish up, there were two other pieces that I wanted to point to. One are the clean energy ministerials. And this is this very cool thing that Secretary Moniz's predecessor, Energy Secretary Stephen Chu, started in 2010, where he gathered together energy ministers from countries all over the globe to compare notes on technology, on companies, on there were all kinds of subgroups on air conditioning and all things like that. And I went to 3 of them with the secretary. They've been held all over the globe. There have been 10 of them. The Clean Energy Ministerial members account for 75% of global greenhouse gas emissions, 90% of global clean energy investments. And it's really, it's the only thing of its kind that can bring sort of this soft, both pressure and inspiration to accelerate this clean energy revolution. They have continued with much weakened US leadership over the last 3 or 4 years. But I think I know that in a President Biden administration that they will take on even more life and greater U.S. leadership. And I just close by mentioning, as part of the Paris Agreement, every country was obliged to develop what was called a mid-century strategy for deep decarbonization. Basically, tell the world how you're going to get to 80% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions by 2050. And it wasn't due until something like 2018 or something like that. The Obama administration, the Obama-Biden administration decided to write ours early. And I really want to recommend that. We helped write it. The White House, Rick Duke at the White House had lead pen. It's a very cool roadmap for how we in the US can hit those targets by 2050. It's called the U.S. Mid-Century Strategy for Deep Decarbonization. I'm sure we can share a link if there's a follow-up communication. You can also Google it. It's on the White House, the Obama White House archives. So Peggy, that's just a flavor of, that was in the second term, on top of everything that was meaningful and substantive in the first term. Leadership at the presidential level matters, and President Biden will bring that in spades.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Kevin. That was really interesting and kind of a pleasant trip down memory lane. So now we're going to switch to a different perspective, but also from an international focus. Lori Dando, like I said before, she's from Minnesota. In fact, she's recently retired from the Foreign Service and is living in Duluth, being a retiree, and I think kind of a full-time grandmother these days. She's a new grandmother from like a few months ago. So she was a career Foreign Service officer, which is a very different role than what Kevin was playing as a political appointee. She serves regardless of who's in the White House. So during her career, she served for the 4 years of the Clinton administration, for the 4 years of the second Bush administration, for the 8 years of both of those, and then 8 years under Barack Obama, and then her last posting, she was there for the end of the Obama-Biden term and for the first couple of years of Donald Trump. And it was in a very critical role for issues that we all care about. She was the head of mission for the UN Environmental Program. So she's going to give us what it's like to be a career Foreign Service person who observes different types of leadership, and particularly in her most recent role, what she saw as the head of UNEP in Nairobi. So Lori, thank you for joining us, and look forward to hearing from you.
So thanks, Peggy, and hello everybody, and thank you especially for tuning in, and to the organizers for putting this discussion together. And just let me start out, since my time is limited, by saying the most important thing: if there's nothing else that you take away from this event, register and vote. It's critical. So Peggy, you gave me sort of a great question, but also a difficult one. And I say difficult because, as you suggested, my allegiance, the oath I took to support the Constitution, was not related to any particular party or person. However, the administration does set policy or position, so it really does make a difference who's in the White House. So let me speak directly to the matter raised, which is why this election matters when it comes to the United States' role as a global climate leader. You know, as Peggy noted, the last 3 years of my career were as a diplomat in Nairobi, Kenya, where I was privileged to represent the United States to the UN, specifically the UN Environment Program, better known as UNEP, and also UN Habitat, both of which are headquartered in Nairobi, which actually hosts the only UN headquarters in the Global South. When I first arrived in the fall of 2016, it was right before the election. And I think respect for the United States was at an all-time high in Kenya, not only because of Obama's roots and Kenyan roots, but also because of Obama's policies. In the beginning of my tenure as permanent representative, the thinking of the United States was highly sought after. We were considered an essential part of every discussion. And I think that was because historically we took a global view of things. We're a country of immigrants. I mean, look at our Olympic team. It looks like we took a person from every country and put them all on one team. We have a global perspective. United States isn't built on racial type or religion, but on principles and ideas. And historically, those ideas are for the greater good, because we come from all over the globe. So it was in UNEP, I felt in the beginning, my instructions were not to use the respect and power of the United States to bully everybody into agreement, but to work in this global forum to make our globe and our planet a better place for everyone. When Trump was elected, things changed. When Trump expounded in the UN on his American First philosophy, our position was not what's best for the world, but what's best for the United States. not that that's bad, but nations weren't really interested in what's best for the US if that's all we have to offer. And furthermore, Trump's disdaining of global cooperation, as the world saw, reiterated in his tirades against the WHO, that had been forecasted by his approach to environmental problems. And the problem is environment issues and pollution don't respect boundaries. We can't build walls to keep out dirty air or toxic water. So really nations have to work together if we're going to tackle any environmental problems, especially climate change. I was a younger environment officer in New Delhi when President Bush, sort of without warning, announced the United States would not ratify the Kyoto Protocol. And I felt at that time that the rug was sort of pulled out from under me. But there were two responses I had to this event. And one was, it was correct. The US was correct in saying climate change was a global problem. And it was problematic that China and India, two of the world's biggest polluters after the United States, were not part of Kyoto. And two, we still had a good story to tell. We were reducing levels of emission. And we were still a respected player in global negotiations. In contrast, when Trump announced the United States would pull out of Paris Agreement, we were the only outlier. I think every major country, including China and India, had agreed, as Kevin pointed out. And furthermore, we were no longer promoting clean technologies, either at home or in the world. And even worse, the United States under Trump promoted coal and oil and other fossil fuels at home and around the globe. It was really a 180-degree reversal. And according to the International Renewable Energy Agency, all renewables now are able to compete with the cost of developing new power plants based on fossil fuels, such as oil and gas. So there's absolutely no reason not to turn to renewables. Plus the research shows that there are up to 10 times more jobs in the renewable energy field than in fossil fuels. So we can export good, sound, renewable technologies. We're good at it. So Trump's anti-renewable, his climate change is a hoax policies aren't even good for an economy. And his policies only hurt us and are only for the benefit of his sort of fossil fuel cronies. So in answer to your question, the change of administration lost us friends. They lost us respect around the world. Trump's policies and positions not only exacerbated climate change, but made the US economy worse off by sort of taking us out of the race in the growing field of renewable technologies. And I see I'm out of time, so I'll just stop there, but we really need to elect Joe Biden for our economy and for a healthy environment and put us back into the global world where we care about the earth. We don't just care about ourselves. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Lori, and thanks, Kevin. Before I push this off to the second panel, what I hadn't thought about until I heard Kevin and Lori talking about this the other day is, if we have 4 more years of Trump, we're not just sitting on the sidelines. That would be bad enough, because we're told we have about 9 more years to act before we really start facing the consequences. We're actually going to be counterproductive, because he's on an agenda that pushes a very high fossil future, that pushes coal, pushes exporting coal and developing coal and oil and natural gas around the planet. And that's really scary. So that was one of my takeaways. And of course, we have to vote. So now we're going to shift gears a little bit, and I'm going to turn the discussion over to Kate Knutz, who's going to talk about what does this mean for Minnesota? Most of us here today are from Minnesota. We work and we live in Minnesota. What are the ramifications for global action and leadership, or global inaction and lack of leadership, for Minnesota jobs, for Minnesota companies, for Minnesota mayors and others that are working on this issue? So Kate, I'll turn it over to you now. And one quick thing, please send us questions, because we should have some time at the end for questions. So we'd love to hear from some of the panelists. Otherwise, Kate and I could think up questions all night.
Great, thank you so much. Yeah, this is a really pretty amazing group of people here we have for Minnesota Clean Energy for Biden. It's such a deep reminder about why getting out to vote, getting your friends and family to make sure that they're voting. And we will have some opportunities for you at the end of this call and then in a follow-up email to contribute to. We have GOTV up, get out the vote if you're not in campaign lingo, to help us all elect Biden as a climate president. So I've got the honor of introducing a couple great climate and clean energy leaders to talk about, to make the connection sort of from global leadership down to what we're doing here in Minnesota. And first, we're going to hear from Jay Drake Hamilton. She's an expert on climate and energy policy, particularly focusing on solutions to climate change. She's been to many global climate events. I know I saw her in Paris. She's also was at the talks in November 2019 in Madrid, and probably could have seen a significant shift in how things played out. She's got a background in physical geography with a degree from Dartmouth, and was an assistant professor at George Washington. And Minneapolis St. Paul magazine named her one of Minnesota's 100 most influential people who make things happen. And I know, having worked in the clean energy and climate space myself for many years, Jay is someone you look to and listen to figure out how to make sense of things and how to find paths forward. So Jay, I want to start with you. If you could talk a little bit about how Minnesota has already been a climate leader and how you think that connects our state to global climate leadership in the ways we've talked about that, and the importance of the presidency. So I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Kate. Hello, everyone. I'm Jay Drake Hamilton. I've been a lead architect in Minnesota energy and climate policy for the last 25 years, and working with a very large, ever-increasing coalition of fantastic people. We have achieved multiple accomplishments in Minnesota each year in every single political climate. So the UN now tells us that by 2030, we need to bend the emissions curve down. We need to speed up existing technologies. That means Minnesota and the world's goal needs to be as much climate ambition in place as possible, as fast as we can do this, and as well with equity for all people. So we think of this as holding leaders accountable, including our new president. We need to have nationwide progress toward a carbon-free economy. Action must be bold, holistic, and multifaceted. And we work to steer our efforts toward pulling on the highest levers of action to actualize optimal policy opportunities. And that's going to mean we need to replace existing infrastructure, replace all of our gas-powered vehicles with electric vehicles, replace buildings, but more importantly, make existing buildings much more efficient, and revamp land use. We need to pull together to achieve the most bold and ambitious results possible. So that means specifically to focus on electricity first. We need to scale up firm, low carbon resources. The grid is going to need to grow 40% larger by 2030 and about 150% larger by 2050. The equity question underlying this is that as part of our agreement in the Paris Agreement, we need to keep warming to no more than 1.5 degrees Celsius by mid-century, and that is a moral obligation as well, especially to rich nations like ours. Reality is the only thing we know of that works, that gives us a source of hope, is first of all, when policy drives technology. And that policy, a set of policies, has worked on developing wind power, on dramatically increasing solar energy, and now with really instrumental changes in batteries. So the technology feeds back again to better politics. The rapidly declining costs of renewable energy makes those technologies more acceptable, which improves politics. And now today, every candidate in the Democratic caucus in the US agrees on the many benefits of no carbon technologies. Now I'm going to give you a set of specific Minnesota examples from how we are making really dramatic improvements in our electric grid. I'm going to mention 3 utilities. The first to announce their baseline was in May of 2019. And Xcel first told Minnesota that they were going to aim to get 80% reduction in carbon emissions by 2030. And then by 2050, they were planning to deliver all carbon-free electricity to all Minnesota customers. Guess what? 2 weeks later, Xcel expanded that 100% carbon-free promise to everyone buying their electricity in all 8 states where they sell power. And then in February 2020, the utility called SIMPA, which stands for Southern Minnesota Municipal Power Administration, which provides power to 18 municipal utilities around Minnesota, ranging from the smallest, Grand Marais, and the largest in Rochester. They announced what they were going to do when that first utility, Xcel Energy, also promised in 2019 to close down all of their remaining coal plants in Minnesota by 2030. Well, guess what? SIMPA owns 41% of the biggest coal plant. What SIMPA agreed to do in February 2020 is entirely replace that coal plant with 50% wind and 50% solar. Then the third dramatic announcement was made on June of 2020 by the second biggest utility in Minnesota, Great River Energy. Great River Energy, until very recently, was getting 95% of their electricity from coal burning power plants, including the biggest coal plant in North Dakota. Well, they made the announcement in June of 2020 that they were going to stop using that coal plant in North Dakota in 2 years. So by the end of 2022. So they will surge ahead of Xcel Energy in getting to zero carbon from coal faster than them. Now let me say to you one remaining thing. I've been to 5 of these conference of parties of the UN, and we never go there alone. We have very important players. One of them is called We Are Still In, or WASI. That is a joint declaration of support for climate action signed by 10 states, including Minnesota, 3,900 CEOs, 12 mayors in Minnesota, including from all 5 of our largest cities in Minnesota. And we even have a cultural leader from Minnesota who serves on their leadership circle. And this is the largest and most diverse coalition of actors ever established in pursuit of climate action in the United States. And second, we work with the United States Climate Alliance, which also Minnesota is a part of. It's a bipartisan coalition of states and territories committed to upholding the objectives of the 2015 Paris Agreement within their borders. So what we are using our work with WASI and with the U.S. Climate Action to do is to accelerate new and add existing policies to decrease carbon pollution and promote clean energy deployment at the state and the federal level. When it's being done at the state level, we call it subnational action. But what we hope to have after the November 3 elections is to have a federal delegation who also will be enthusiastic about working on the Paris Agreement. We must show nations and the world that ambitious climate action is possible, and show them that state level action is benefiting our economies, strengthening our communities, creating jobs, cutting air pollution, improving human health, and building more resilient communities. Now, every time I've been to one of the UN conferences, I've always been asked to speak from the global podium. And I've been asked to do that because I bring together speakers from Minnesota, especially from corporate Minnesota, to talk about the advantages they've seen. And some of those corporations I brought with me were to Bonn in 2017. I was there with Target. And in Madrid, I was there with Cargill Corporation from Minnesota. So I'll stop now and head it back to Kate. Thanks, Kate.
Great, thanks, Jay, for that great overview connecting Minnesota's leadership with leadership on the global stage. Now I'm going to turn it over to Pete Wyckoff. Dr. Pete Wyckoff is trained as a forensic psychologist, now works in the policy space. He worked for a number of years as a professor at the University of Minnesota Morris, and Morris itself has been a real leader on climate and clean energy in the state of Minnesota. And he moved to DC as a AAAS fellow working in agencies and the US Senate, and he's here in his own capacity tonight, but he has a great perspective from Minnesota to DC on how the country is moving forward in climate and clean energy. So I want to ask you, really, what's at stake in this election from your perspective, and how a Biden administration can really accelerate clean energy adoption and deployment in Minnesota? I know last time our first call, we heard from mayors, and what we heard from mayors was the great work that they're doing, and to really unleash the potential of cities and of states and of every level, we need this national leadership going up to the global leadership to all have us pushing towards the same goal. So could you talk a little bit about what's at stake from electing a Biden administration? It's a big question. So.
I'll do what I can. Can you all hear me? All right.
Yep.
Do I need to do anything? Okay. Thanks, Kate, and thanks to all the panelists, and thanks for everybody who's on. I can see that my father is on, and he's a preacher, so I'm a preacher's kid, so I'm going to try to up the hey, we got 49 days sort of energy here. So I'm Pete Wyckoff. I'm required by Senate rules to say I'm not here as a staff member for Minnesota Senator Tina Smith, which is my day job. I'm here as a private citizen to tell you need to vote for Joe Biden and that you need to vote for Democrats. So as Kate just said, I have been in Washington for 4 years. Before that, I was born and raised in Minnesota. And I was a professor of forest ecology at the University of Minnesota Morris for the better part of 2 decades. As a professor, what I did is I studied the effects of climate and other factors on Minnesota's forests. And one thing I like to point out to people, because I'm sure everybody on the call loves to go out to Minnesota state parks. And when you go out there, you will see a map. And that map shows prairie, and it shows deciduous forest, and it shows evergreen forest. And that map is a snapshot. That map is already somewhat of a lie. That map is what the state of Minnesota looked at like in the 1860s. Those boundaries between prairie and one kind of forest and another kind of forest, those are set by climate. And as the climate changes, and we know that this has been the case for Minnesota in the deep past, since the last ice age, there have been times when Minnesota was completely prairie, and we may be heading back to that. There are some computer models that say with the expected trajectory of Minnesota's climate change this century, Minnesota's forests may have completely retreated, and Minnesota will be a savanna by the end of the century. That's not the Minnesota I grew up in. That's not the Minnesota I love. That's not the Minnesota I think any of you guys on the call want to live in. So what are we going to do about it? I've been in DC for 4 years now. I arrived as a naive science professor in the fall of 2016. And what I was going to do is I was going to help Senator Al Franken work with President Hillary Clinton to finally get a grip on this climate problem. Things change. They don't always work out the way you want them to, but they can also change in the other direction. We have 49 days. We have 49 days to talk to our friends. We have 49 days to vote. And it's not 49 days till you go vote. It's 49 days till the voting's over. In Virginia, where I live now, and in Minnesota, you can start voting as early as this Friday. Go do it. And then drag all your friends for the next 7 weeks to the polls and make sure they drag their friends to the polls, because that's what it's going to take. Minnesota is a swing state. Minnesota is one of the keys to either a Biden or a Trump victory, and they both know it, and they both will be investing in the state. So you Minnesotans are going to play a big role. There's a huge difference between a President Biden and a President Trump. There's a huge difference between a Senate controlled by Mitch McConnell and a Senate with a Democratic majority. And on the state level, there's a huge difference between a Democratic House and a Democratic governor and a Republican-controlled Senate versus what could happen on the state level if this election goes the way it needs to go. When I came out, we loved to brag. I would write speeches for Senator Franken bragging about how Minnesota was a leader on climate change. And Jay gave you some great examples of Minnesota corporations that are leading on climate change. Minnesota is no longer a leader on climate change. Minnesota is no longer a leader on climate change because the Republican Senate in Minnesota keeps it from being a leader on climate change. One of my favorite articles to quote recently was by a guy named Dave Roberts, who writes for Vox. And he had a variation on that internet meme, one weird trick to do whatever. It's supposed to be clickbait, right? And his was one weird trick that can help any state or city pass clean energy policy, and I would say any country as well. And that one weird trick is you look at where actual climate policy is being set at the state, local, and soon hopefully national level, and it's where the Democrats control both the legislative branch and the executive branch. If that doesn't happen at a national level, we will not get the rapid progress we need. If that doesn't happen at the state level, Minnesota will not get the progress it needs. So the situation's pretty dire out here. I don't know if any of you are Game of Thrones fans, but after the election 2016, I said, our job is now as, pro-climate staffers working for pro-climate senators to be on that wall, and the hordes are coming over and we just hack at them, but they're going to get across anyway, right? And that's what the last 4 years have felt like. I want to go back on offense. In order to do that, first of all, I need a different president in the White House, because the executive branch really matters. How does a bill become a law? The president gets to decide in the end, right? So we can't really do anything legislatively, and presidents get to do a lot of things just on their own through controlling the agencies that, Congress doesn't even have a direct say. So first and foremost, we need President Trump, who has at every step of the way done everything he can to inhibit climate progress. We need him gone. We need someone else running the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission so that the federal government isn't undermining all the great work being done at the state. We need someone else running the Department of Energy so it isn't withholding money that Congress has appropriated to fund solar energy projects. We need someone else running the Ag Department, every department. But we also need someone else in charge of the Senate. But if we just get Biden and we don't get a Democratic Senate, he can still do a lot of things. Kevin and those who spoke earlier talked about, honestly, the accomplishments of the Obama-Biden administration. And a lot of those were done without any help from Congress. And a lot of those were done with a hostile Congress that wasn't going to provide any help. So having the presidency is the first and foremost most important thing. If you look at how Biden is running on climate, and if you read his climate plans, and I encourage you to go to his website and read his climate plans, or read some of the source documents that came from his Bernie Sanders, Joe Biden sort of peacemaking summit committees. Everybody's pushing in the same direction across the Democratic Party now, and it's seen in the Biden climate proposals, which are the most aggressive and also the first proposals made by any president ever, including President Obama, that are sufficient to the task to do the U.S. part of what is needed to put a check on dangerous climate change. So read what Biden has out there. He has a great plan. And then go read the Select Committee on the Climate Crisis report from the Democratic-controlled House, and you'll find it's pushing in the same direction. It has broadly the same contours. It will lead us to a U.S. economy that is a net zero emission economy by mid-century, which is where we need to be, or sooner. And then the self-serving third thing I'd have you read is the Senate Democrats, notice it's only Democrats, recently released Select Committee on the Climate Crisis report. There's no Republicans on the committee, which is just a third document laying out basically the same plan, saying, this is what we got to do, let's do it. Read those, you will be impressed. They are up to the task. When I first arrived in Washington, one of the most fun nights I had was a party right when the Paris Agreement finally had enough signatories to go into effect. This was before the US election, not too much before the US election. That was the high point of climate optimism since I moved from Minnesota to Washington. It's been downhill ever since, but it can turn around, and it needs to turn around. We can get back in Paris. We can undo a lot of the damage, but only if Trump is held to 4 years, not 8. So I will shut up and get off my down from my pulpit. So
no, thank you so much, Pete. That was really helpful in terms of helping people understand the reality of what we need to actually push big, bold, significant progress. And I'm seeing some questions about, in particular, about the U.S. leadership in having created the problem. And it's not just an annual emissions. We've put the most emissions into the atmosphere. And so leading on reducing emissions and then adapting to climate change as it's coming too, I think is a really key part of that. Thank you for that question, Raj. We only have about 5 minutes, so I would encourage panelists to check out the chat, and if there's things you want to add there, there's some questions about keeping the warming to 1.5 degrees, getting rid of fossil fuel subsidies, some questions particularly about the University of Minnesota Morris. All really, the thing is about climate change is there is more and more to work on, and what I want to wrap up with this panel is the idea that just imagine the possibility of a president calling all of us to do everything we can at every level, from the city to the state to the country to the world, to not just stop the bad stuff, but to build the good stuff we need to build: the clean energy jobs, the climate resilient infrastructure, the communities with strong ties checking on each other. We don't just want to be stopping bad. We want a president who is calling us to build the best future that's yet to come. And I think President Biden has clearly shown he is capable of that. Or I see I'm calling him President Biden. We all need to make that statement a reality, because I'm tired of being tired of bad stuff. I want to build an amazing future for each of us, for my daughter, for when I was watching the Paris Agreement adopted in the room, tears down my face, seeing the best of people coming together. That's what we can have with the Biden presidency if we all do the work we need to do now. So I'm going to turn it over to Peggy with some asks for the Minnesota Clean Energy for Biden team, and I'll ask the panelists to answer some questions in the chat so we can wrap it up on time. And I want to thank Peggy.
There's never enough time for questions, and we were getting all sorts of great questions. I'm gonna try to put strike fear into everybody's hearts before maybe I turn it back to Kate on action plans for how we deal with that fear instead of waking up at 3 a.m. having panic attacks. Donald Trump's supporters are loud and proud, and they're motivated. And we have to recognize that right now. I live in a very blue state, and I see far more Trump signs when I'm out on the water, flying from boats, from trucks. You would think that we were Oklahoma or Alabama right now. They are highly motivated. They're shouting their support from the rooftops. We must do the same for Joe Biden and for Kamala Harris. Our level of enthusiasm is a little bit lame so far, in my opinion. And maybe in Seattle, we're not seeing as much Trump, but you just go 3 miles outside the borders of Seattle and you would think this was Trump land. Now, I like to believe that just because they're loud and proud doesn't mean that they're really representing a lot of numbers, but we all who are here today have to show unbridled enthusiasm for Joe Biden. The stakes are too high, we know that, and one of the goals that we're trying to do here at Clean Energy for Biden is to pull together the broad number of climate voters in Minnesota that have done all the action that Jay has talked about and Peter has talked about in Minnesota. Minnesota is a state that's like the jewel of the Midwest right now, even with a Senate that's not cooperating. We need to do whatever we can. We need to, if you can contribute a little more money tonight, that's fantastic. If you have the capability, give money to the campaign, give time to the campaign, get every single person you know out there to vote, and it's your parents, your grandparents, your children, your neighbors. Be as loud and proud and excited about Joe Biden as unfortunately the Trump supporters are about their person. I don't understand it. We can question it. We could talk forever about why that is, but it is what it is. We must counter it fiercely. And we've got some issues that we're trying to work on in terms of getting out the vote. Kate, I don't know if you want to really quickly.
Yeah, if I want, I can give a couple things to people. So if you look in the chat right now, we are at $4,895. That is very, very close to our $5,000 goal. So if you could give a little bit more tonight, we would really appreciate that. We would celebrate that. And it goes directly to helping elect Joe Biden president. And it gets targeted to where it's needed in the campaign right now. We have our first Get Out the Vote event this Thursday. And you can learn more about that. The link's in the chat. We have over 150 people who've registered for that. We need more. It is, I've never seen that many people get signed up for a Get Out the Vote. You can do it from the safety and security and non-pandemic exposure location of your own home. And we'll get you an in-person update, an insider update from Corey Day, who leads the Biden campaign here in Minnesota. He'll give us a really great grounding in what the Biden campaign is doing here in Minnesota. So you get to learn a lot from him. And then
remind us when that is again, Kate.
It's this Thursday at 5. And the link is in the chat. And we're also send you a follow-up email that you can get the link. So you'll get to hear from Corey Day, who leads the Biden campaign here in Minnesota. You'll get trained up, and then you'll get to be on the line with the camaraderie of your other climate champions, making calls to talk with voters about how to vote, to make sure they vote, to have the plan to vote, that they're voting for Biden, and all the way down the ticket, as Pete mentioned, electing Democrats to get the kind of climate action we need. And we'll be doing those weekly, every Thursday at 5. And if we get enough interest, we'll be adding more. So sign up for that. You can get your friends to sign up for Clean Energy for Biden as well. There's also an app called the Vote Joe app, which you can figure out how to text your friends and relatives, anyone who you have contact information from, to make sure they're hearing from people they know about why it's so important to get out and vote in this election. And then follow us on social media. We have a great group of high school and college students who are leading our Instagram and our Twitter accounts. So hopefully we can have those social media accounts up in the chat as well. So follow, retweet, share, tag, all of the great social media actions you can do, just to, as Peggy said, show that excitement, not just anti-Trump, but really the possibility of what, I don't know, to even just think about it as a Biden presidency, but what a Biden presidency means for us as Americans and the future that we're able to create together at this absolutely critical moment in our country and in our world's history, as we're deciding the kind of climate future we're going to live in. So we really appreciate all the panelists here tonight, and the leadership you've all given here in Minnesota, federally, at the national level, and all the way to the international, representing our country on the international stage is really a high honor, and we really appreciate you bringing back your perspectives and learnings from that. And we'll get an email out to you with all the follow-up information. And as a fellow Minnesotan and fellow American, thank you for taking the time to learn about this election and to learn about why it matters so much. And for the next 50 days, thank you for giving your time, your talent, and your treasure to make sure that our country has the kind of future we know it can have, and that we and all of our kids deserve. So thanks, everyone. And to put it on a high note, we just hit $5,100. So we beat our we beat our goal. And then even more, our goal, join us on Thursday to get out and talk to voters about why this election matters so much, and the kind of future we can create together. Thanks, everybody. Really appreciate it.
Thanks.